welcome to the Deep Dive. Okay, today we're jumping right into some really significant things happening recently, both in Canada and beyond. We've sifted through a whole stack of sources, official statements, news reports, you name it, and our mission here really is to pull out the absolute must-know info for you. Think of it as a shortcut to getting up to speed with all the important context.
Exactly. And, the topics might seem all over the place today. Immigration, diplomacy, even local crime, environmental stuff. But you'll start to see the connections. How these smaller stories often reflect bigger trends, bigger challenges. It gives you a much richer picture, I think. So yeah, let's get into it.
Okay, first up, this Strong Borders Act. The government announced it June 17th. Sounds like a pretty big deal for Canada's immigration system.
Oh, it is. A very big deal. Essentially, the main goal is to strengthen Canada's immigration framework, and tied into that, boost U.S. border security as well. It gives the government some significant new powers. Specifically, they can now stop or even revoke immigration documents.
Like what kind of documents?
We're talking visas, work permits, study permits, if they decide it's in the public interest.
Public interest. That sounds quite broad. What does that usually cover?
It typically relates to things like national security, serious crime concerns, maybe public health risks. It does give the government quite a bit of room to maneuver.
Right. But, importantly, the source material we looked at says these new powers don't initially apply to asylum claims. That's a key distinction, isn't it?
It is a very important one. So it's not hitting asylum seekers right away in the same way. And beyond the security angle, the act also tackles fraud. It aims to speed up how information gets shared between the Federal Immigration Department, IRCC, and the provinces.
Okay, so faster info sharing to catch fraud and manage services better. Makes sense. But what about the asylum system itself? You said it's impacted too.
Yeah, it is. The idea there is to streamline how claims are processed and also to clear out applications that aren't really being actively worked on anymore. And here's a significant change. If someone withdraws their asylum claim, a removal order can now be enforced immediately.
Immediately. Wow, okay, that's a shift. And there are even more specific changes coming for asylum seekers, right? Something about June 3rd, 2025.
That's right. New rules kick in then. Basically, an asylum case won't go to the Immigration and Refugee Board, the IRB, if the person claimed asylum over a year ago. Or, and this is also key, if they arrived irregularly by land from the U.S. and waited more than 14 days after arriving to make their claim.
Those are very specific deadlines. 14 days isn't a long time.
No, it's not. But there is a safety net of sorts. People affected by these rules can still apply for protection through something called a pre-removal risk assessment.
Okay, so there's still a pathway, a different one.
Exactly. It's a review to see if they'd face danger if sent back. So yeah, overall, this signals a definite shift. Tighter controls, aiming for more efficiency. It's going to have, real implications for international students, workers, and definitely asylum seekers trying to navigate the system.
Speaking of borders and security, there's this other issue heating up: synthetic drugs. Seems like there's a bit of a disagreement between the U.S. and Canada about fentanyl trafficking.
A bit of one, yeah. It really flared up after FBI Director Kash Patel made some pretty direct accusations in a podcast interview.
What did he claim exactly?
He claimed that fentanyl precursors are coming into Canada, being manufactured into fentanyl, specifically in Vancouver, and then shipped out globally. He even suggested cartels are using Canada now to get fentanyl into the U.S. because the Mexican border is tighter.
That's a huge claim, especially coming from the FBI director. How did Canada respond?
Well, the RCMP, specifically the Pacific Region Assistant Commander, pushed back pretty hard. They strongly denied Patel's assertion, said it's not backed up by Canadian data, and importantly, not confirmed by U.S. agencies like the DEA or Customs and Border Protection either.
So a direct contradiction from law enforcement on both sides of the border, essentially.
Pretty much. Now, the RCMP official did concede one point. They acknowledged that most of the raw materials, the precursors for fentanyl, do come from China into Canada. But they were very clear in denying any large-scale export of finished fentanyl from Vancouver or Canada in general.
Interesting nuance there.
Yeah.
And what about actual seizure data? Does that shed any light?
It does seem to support the RCMP's position, at least based on the 2024 U.S. figures we saw. At the U.S.-Mexico border, authorities seized over 18,000 pounds of fentanyl.
18,000, wow.
Yeah, compare that to the Canada-U.S. border. Just 10 pounds seized.
10 pounds versus 18,000. That is a A massive difference.
It really is. Now, this isn't the first time accusations like this have surfaced. An organized crime expert pointed out Canada took steps after similar claims were made under the Trump administration. But Patel's comments have definitely stirred the pot again.
So what does this all mean for you, listening?
Well, it highlights first the potential for diplomatic friction, but also the huge ongoing challenge of the opioid crisis itself. And critically, it reminds us how important it is to look closely at verified data versus, maybe more anecdotal or politically charged claims when we're trying to understand these really complex global problems.
Okay, let's shift focus now to some crime stories closer to home. There was a pretty major alcohol theft case busted in Brampton, Ontario.
Yeah, this one involved quite a bit of money. Police arrested two men, Anuj Kumar, 25, and Simranpreet Singh, 29. They're accused of stealing almost $300,000 worth of alcohol.
$300,000. From where?
From various LCBO stores. That's the government-run liquor store chain in Ontario. And get this, police have linked them to 35 separate cases. 35. Plus, some of those included drug charges, and they also had 4 old arrest warrants out for them.
Okay, so definitely not just a one-off shoplifting thing. Sounds organized.
Exactly. They're both in custody waiting for bail hearings, and police say the investigation's still going. More arrests might follow. Peel police really emphasize they're cracking down on this kind of organized retail theft.
Yeah, I saw the source material mention that this kind of theft, especially alcohol theft, gets a lot of attention, sometimes on social media, and it specifically noted cases sometimes involving Indian origin youth being highlighted online. It points to a visible community concern about retail crime.
Right. And then switching gears slightly, there was this kind of bizarre marijuana smuggling arrest at the border.
Oh, yeah. What happened there?
U.S. Customs arrested an American citizen, a 43-year-old man named Ronaldin. He was driving a rental truck. They found about 78 pounds of cannabis inside.
78 pounds. And what was his story?
His claim was pretty creative. He said he was just following his GPS in Canada and accidentally ended up driving back into the U.S. over the Peace Bridge.
Accidentally, with 78 pounds of weed.
Well, that's the other part. He apparently told officials the truck was empty, but they found 3 big cardboard boxes inside packed with 80 vacuum-sealed bags of cannabis.
Right. Not exactly empty then. Do we know the value?
The estimated street value in the U.S. was around $230,000.
Wow. So these local stories, the big alcohol theft ring, the accidental cannabis smuggling, what's the bigger picture for you?
I think they show a couple of things. One is the real impact of organized retail crime. It's not petty stuff. It affects businesses, communities. And the border story highlights the ongoing complexities of enforcement, even with something like cannabis that's legal in Canada but not federally in the U.S. It just shows the diverse challenges law enforcement is constantly dealing with.
All right, let's pivot now to social policy. There's a significant development out of Quebec concerning how transgender inmates are housed in provincial prisons.
Yes. Quebec's public security minister announced a new policy. Essentially, transgender inmates will now be placed in facilities based on their physical appearance or their biological sex. The policy states housing decisions will be based on body scans, with the stated goal being the safety of all inmates.
Okay, so placement based on physical characteristics, not gender identity. That sounds like a really complex issue, balancing safety and identity rights.
It absolutely is. The government did add some nuance, though. They said some accommodations will still be made, and transgender inmates can still live according to their preferred gender identity within the prison walls.
So it's about the physical housing unit, primarily.
That seems to be the main focus, yes. They've also apparently created a guide for prison staff on gender education. Just for context, the source mentioned that as of last week, there were only 6 inmates identifying as transgender out of about 5,400 total in Quebec's provincial system.
6 out of 5,400, okay.
Right.
Now, for something completely different, but also about how communities function, Montreal's BIXI bikes had a moment recently, didn't they?
Oh, did they ever? It's a fascinating case of urban resilience. You probably heard Montreal had that public transit strike.
Yeah, maintenance workers, right?
Yeah.
Shut down a lot of bus and metro service for about a week in June.
Exactly, from Juneteenth to 17th. Reduced service mainly, though weekends were okay, but people still needed to get around during the week. And BXI, the city's bike share program, just exploded.
So much.
Get this. For 7 out of the 9 strike days, they had over 80,000 rides per day.
80,000, that's huge.
It gets better. On June 11th, they set an all-time record, 98,500 rides in a single day. Think about rush hour, they were seeing about 10,000 trips an hour.
Yeah.
That works out to roughly 3 bikes being rented every second.
Wow, just constant turnover. How did they even manage that?
They had to scramble, BXI deployed extra docking stations, brought in more staff. They really stepped up. It's kind of amazing how quickly people adapted.
It really is. So these
Yeah.
two items, the Quebec prison policy and the BXI boom, they seem worlds apart, but maybe they both tell us something.
I think so. One highlights that ongoing, difficult debate about balancing safety and rights in institutions. The other shows how adaptable cities and people can be when faced with disruption. Maybe that strike even converted some people to cycling long term. Who knows? It shows how habits can change. #5, international diplomacy and environmental challenges.
Okay, let's zoom back out to the international stage. Prime Minister Mark Carney has some travel coming up.
That's right. He'll be overseas June 22nd to 25th. Stops in Brussels, Belgium, and then The Hague in the Netherlands.
And the purpose? Big meetings, I assume?
Yep, he's attending the Canada-European Union Summit and also the NATO Summit North Atlantic Treaty Organization.
So strengthening ties with Europe at the EU summit, probably talking trade, security.
Exactly. The focus there is on Canada-Europe relations, trade, business, protecting rules-based trade, and also security and defense cooperation.
And the NATO summit, what's the main agenda there?
Addressing global threats is the big theme, naturally. But there's a very specific focus on supporting Ukraine, helping them achieve justice and a lasting peace. And related to that, the Prime Minister's office put out a statement on June 18th reaffirming Canada's commitment to strengthening its military.
Ah, the defense spending targets.
Yeah. The statement mentioned aiming to meet the 2% of GDP defense spending target this year, with plans for more investment down the road. It's about showing commitment to allies, especially with everything going on globally.
Right. Now, while Canada's focusing on global security, there's a really tough situation unfolding back home related to the environment, specifically in Manitoba's Indigenous communities after those wildfires.
Yeah, this is a really difficult aftermath scenario. Even though wildfire evacuation orders have been lifted in many areas, some Indigenous communities like the Talkari First Nation or TCN are being told not to go back home yet.
Not because of fire risk anymore, but something else.
Exactly. It's a severe water problem. After the fires, tests on the water supply showed high levels of aluminum. On top of that, their water treatment plant isn't working, and the main water supply had to be shut off entirely.
Oh, that's awful. So they can't go home because there's literally no safe water.
Pretty much. It's a critical infrastructure failure triggered by the environmental disaster. They need to clean out all the pipes and tanks, then retest everything. Understandably, they've declared a state of emergency just based on the water quality issue.
What's being done to help?
Well, there are ongoing discussions, TCN leaders talking with Indigenous Services Canada and Health Canada to figure out solutions. The Red Cross is involved too. They've extended transportation support for community members who are displaced. And on a related note, Manitoba Hydro is planning repairs for fire-damaged power lines and poles this Saturday.
Okay, so rebuilding is starting, but it sounds like a long road, especially with the water crisis.
It really underscores the long tail of these climate-related disasters, doesn't it? Particularly for more vulnerable communities. You have the immediate fire threat and then these cascading impacts on essential infrastructure like water and power. It shows how interconnected everything is, from global climate patterns right down to local recovery efforts. #outro.
Wow. We've really covered a lot of ground today, haven't we? From, big policy changes like the Strong Borders Act, international disputes over drugs, right down to local crime issues, community resilience in Montreal, and these devastating wildfire after effects.
It really paints a picture, doesn't it? All these different pieces, immigration policy, global diplomacy, local safety, environmental fallout, they're not really separate things. You see how global events or policies impact communities, how environmental issues create social crises. It's all deeply interconnected.
Absolutely. So as we finish up this deep dive, maybe something for you, our listener, to think about is, what's our role in all this? As people trying to stay informed, how do these stories, these individual snapshots we talked about, reflect maybe bigger shifts in society or government priorities? And what responsibility do we have in understanding, maybe even engaging with, these really complex challenges?
Yeah, it's worth considering. How do we move from just knowing about these things to perhaps contributing to better outcomes?
Definitely food for thought. We hope this deep dive gave you some valuable insights and encourages you to keep digging, keep asking questions about the issues that matter. Thanks for joining us.